The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and dreamed of reaching those distant lights. They built rockets. They landed on their moon. They sent robots to Mars and probes beyond the edge of their solar system. They sent radio signals into the darkness, hoping someone would answer. Someone did answer, but not in the way humanity had hoped. The Galactic Concord was an alliance of 12 ancient species. They had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had seen young species rise and fall like waves on a shore. They had strict rules about who could join their great civilization. A species had to be peaceful. A species had to be controllable. A species had to know its place. When the Concord intercepted Earth's radio signals, they studied humanity for nearly 50 years. They watched human wars. They listened to human music. They decoded human languages and read human history. What they found made them afraid. Humans were too aggressive. Humans adapted too quickly. Humans never stopped pushing forward, never stopped reaching for more. The Concord's greatest scholars met in secret and made a terrible prediction. If humanity was allowed to reach the stars, they would not stop until they had conquered everything. The vote was unanimous. All 12 species agreed. Humanity had to be destroyed before it became a threat. Admiral of the Dominion led the attack fleet. 3,000 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel just beyond Earth's moon. They did not send warnings. They did not make demands. They simply opened fire. The first wave of antimatter missiles struck Earth's major cities. New York, Tokyo, London, Beijing, Mumbai, all of them vanished in blinding flashes of light. The oceans boiled. The atmosphere burned. 8 billion people died in the first hour. But humanity did not die quietly. Earth's defense forces fought back with everything they had. Nuclear missiles, laser satellites, kinetic bombardment platforms. They knew they could not win. They fought anyway. Every ship that launched from Earth bought time for the evacuation ships fleeing from Mars. Captain commanded the defense station above Japan. She watched her homeland disappear beneath a cloud of fire and ash. Her husband, her children, her parents. Everything she had ever loved was gone in a single flash of light. She did not scream, she did not cry. She simply turned to her crew and gave one final order. All batteries target the lead ship, make them remember us. Her station's weapons carved a burning line across the flagship before the return fire tore her station apart. Should have died that day. Instead, the explosion threw her escape pod into the debris field where it drifted, unnoticed, for 3 days. A refugee ship found her. She was badly burned. Her left arm was gone, but she was alive. The killing continued for 72 hours. The burned Earth until nothing remained but glass and ash. The collective released biological weapons on the colony ships fleeing Mars. Millions died choking on engineered plagues. The Synod of the Pale hunted survivors through the asteroid belt with cold precision. Their priests said it was holy work, cleansing the galaxy of a dangerous species. When it was over, the Concord updated their records. Sol system, sterilized. Species 4217, human, extinct. They built monuments on a dozen worlds. They wrote books about the primitive species that had almost escaped its cradle. Children of 100 civilizations learned about humans in school, a warning about what happened to species that grew too ambitious. The galaxy moved on. The Concord returned to its ancient peace. The name humanity became a footnote in history books. But the galaxy had made a mistake. Deep in the empty space between stars, where no sensors could reach and no empire bothered to look, 17 battered ships drifted in silence. They were colony vessels, originally built to carry settlers to distant worlds. Now they carried the last survivors of Earth. 1.2 million humans had escaped the killing. They were wounded. They were sick. They had lost everything, their homes, their families, their world. Many wanted to die. Some did die from injuries or grief or simple loss of will to continue. Now admiral of a fleet that existed only because no one knew it still survived, gathered the survivors in the largest ship's cargo bay. She stood before them with her burns still healing and her empty sleeve pinned to her shoulder. "They think we are dead," she said. Her voice was rough from smoke damage, but it carried to every corner of the room. "They think they have won. They have gone back to their perfect civilization and forgotten about us." She looked at the faces before her, old and young, engineers and farmers, soldiers and teachers, all that remained of 8 billion souls. "They made a mistake," continued. They studied us for 50 years, but they did not understand us. They thought we would break. They thought we would scatter and fade away in the darkness. Her remaining hand closed into a fist. They were wrong. We will not break. We will not fade. We will survive in the shadows they do not watch. We will grow strong in the places they have forgotten. And one day, maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not in my children's lifetime, we will return. A young engineer named Elias stood near the front of the crowd. He had lost his wife and 3 children on Mars. His hands still shook when he tried to sleep. But something in the Admiral's words reached through his grief and found the ember of rage that still burned in his chest. "What do we do until then?" he asked. Admiral looked at him. Despite everything she had lost, her eyes still held fire. "We remember," she said. "We remember every name. We remember every city. We remember every child who never got to grow up. We remember, and we teach our children to remember and their children after them. We remember until the day we can make the galaxy remember too." She raised her fist, and her voice rose with it. "We remember everything." The survivors repeated her words. At first it was a whisper, then it became a chant, then it became a roar that shook the metal walls of the cargo bay. "We remember everything." The 17 ships turned away from the burning grave of Earth and flew into the darkness between stars. They carried with them the last hope of humanity, and a promise that would take 300 years to keep. The galaxy had marked Earth as extinct. The galaxy would learn how wrong it was. The first 10 years were the hardest. The 17 ships of the remnant fleet drifted through the empty space between star systems. They had limited fuel. They had limited food. They had limited medicine. Every day was a battle for survival. Admiral made difficult choices. She ordered strict rationing. Every calorie was counted. Every drop of water was recycled. People worked 16-hour shifts to keep the ships running. Many died from exhaustion, from illness, from wounds that never healed properly. But humans were stubborn creatures. They refused to die. Elias became the fleet's chief engineer. He had no formal training in spacecraft repair, but he learned quickly. He took apart broken systems and rebuilt them with whatever materials he could find. He taught others to do the same. Soon, every adult in the fleet knew how to patch a hull breach and repair a life support system. The children learned even faster. They grew up in zero gravity, floating through corridors that their parents still found disorienting. They learned to read by studying technical manuals. They learned math by calculating fuel consumption rates. By the age of 10, most of them could take apart a reactor and put it back together blindfolded. Admiral knew they needed more than survival skills. They needed purpose. She established schools in every ship. Children learned history, not just Earth's history, but the history of the species that had destroyed them. They learned the languages of the conquered. They studied military tactics. They memorized biology. They analyzed the religious texts of the Synod of the Pale. "Know your enemy," told them. "Know them better than they know themselves. That is how we will win." The first generation of survivors died slowly, passed away 32 years after Earth's destruction. She was 78 years old. In her final moments, she held the hand of her adopted daughter, Maya, and whispered her last words. "Never forget, never forgive, never stop." Maya became the new admiral. Under her leadership, the remnant found its first permanent home, a rogue planet drifting through the void between galaxies. It had no sun, no warmth, no life. It was perfect. They called it Haven. The engineers hollowed out the planet's rocky interior and built a city inside it. They used geothermal energy from the planet's core to power their lights and heat their homes. They grew food in hydroponic farms and recycled every molecule of waste. From the outside, Haven looked like just another dead rock floating through space. Inside, it was the seed of humanity's future. Elias led the research division. He was an old man now, his hair white and his hands steady despite his age. He had spent 50 years studying the wreckage of conquered ships, pieces recovered from battlefields, salvaged from debris fields, stolen by brave scouts who ventured into enemy space. "Their technology is advanced," he told his students, "but they have stopped improving it. They have been using the same weapons for 1,000 years. They see no reason to change. Why would they? No one has challenged them in generations." He held up a plasma rifle, its casing cracked and burned. "We will challenge them. And when we do, they will discover that 300 years of peace has made them slow, comfortable, weak." His grandson was among those students. had inherited his grandfather's brilliant mind and his father's steady hands. He also carried something else, a cold rage that never faded, passed down through 3 generations like a genetic trait. Improved the plasma rifle. He made it smaller, more powerful, more efficient. Then he improved their shield technology, then their engines, then their sensors. Everything the Conquered had built, humanity made better. By the 150th year, the remnant had grown to 50 million people. They had built a dozen hidden bases scattered across the galaxy's forgotten corners. They had ships, not many, but enough. They had weapons that no conquered species had ever seen. But they still waited. "We are not ready," said Admiral, great-grandson of. "We have strength, but not enough. We must be certain. When we strike, we cannot fail." He was right. The Conquered still commanded thousands of warships. The remnant had hundreds. Numbers alone would destroy them. So they continued to build. They continued to learn. They continued to remember. Director Sarah, great-granddaughter of Elias, oversaw the construction of the new fleet. She designed warships unlike anything the galaxy had seen. They were fast, faster than any conquered vessel. They were tough. Their armor could withstand weapons that would vaporize lesser ships. They were deadly. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But her greatest creation was something else entirely. She called it the Memory Core. It was a massive database containing everything humanity had lost. Every book, every song, every piece of art, every scientific discovery, every name of every person who had died on Earth. 8 billion names stored in crystal memory that would last forever. "We carry our dead with us," Sarah told her engineers. "We carry them into battle, we carry them into victory. They will see what we do in their name." By the 290th year, the remnant had grown to 400 million people. Their fleet numbered 8,000 warships, each one crewed by soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a war that would begin before they died. The day finally came when Supreme Commander, descendant of both founding bloodlines, stood before the assembled fleet. She was 42 years old. She had never seen Earth, but she knew every city's name. She had never met her ancestors, but she carried their fire in her heart. Behind her, through the viewport of her flagship, stretched an ocean of warships. 8,000 vessels, each one painted black as the void between stars. Each one carrying crews who had waited their entire lives for this moment. 300 years ago, the Conquered tried to murder us, said. Her voice was calm, almost quiet. They failed. Today we remind them of their failure. She turned to face her fleet. "Set course for conquered space. We are going home, and we are bringing our dead with us." The engines of 8,000 ships ignited as one. The human armada, hidden for 3 centuries, began its journey toward the light. The long dark was over. The reckoning had begun. Censor Officer was bored. He had served at the border station for 12 years. Nothing ever happened here. The station floated at the edge of space, watching for threats that never came. The last real battle had been before his grandfather's time. War was a thing of history books, not real life. So when his sensors showed thousands of unknown ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, he assumed it was a glitch. He ran a diagnostic. The readings stayed the same. He ran another diagnostic, still the same. "Commander," he called out, his voice uncertain, "I think you need to see this." Commander Al walked over to his station and looked at the screen. Her scales went pale, a sign of extreme shock among the. "That is impossible," she whispered. "They are not in our database," said. "None of these ship designs match any known species, and their numbers." "I can see their numbers," Al's voice was sharp. "Contact Conquered Command now." Before the message could be sent, every screen on the station went dark. Then, slowly, an image appeared. A human woman in black armor stood before a viewport. Behind her, an endless field of warships stretched into the distance. Did not recognize the species at first. Why would he? Humans had been extinct for 300 years. He had learned about them in school as a child, a minor historical footnote about a primitive species that had been eliminated before it could become dangerous. Then the woman spoke, and her words hit him like a physical blow. "This is Supreme Commander of the human remnant." Human, the word echoed in his mind. That was impossible. Humans were dead. Humans were gone. Humans were extinct. 300 years ago, you murdered our world, the human continued. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful, but her eyes held something terrifying. You slaughtered our children, you burned our cities, you erased us from your records and called it justice. She paused. When she spoke again, her voice was harder. We have returned to correct your records. Humanity is not extinct, and before this war ends, you will pray that we were. The transmission ended. The screens returned to normal. For a long moment, no one on the station moved. Then Commander Al began shouting orders. The station's alarms screamed. Messages flew toward Concord Command. The response fleet, 200 warships stationed nearby for exactly this kind of emergency, began powering up their weapons. Watched his sensors as the human fleet approached. They moved in perfect formation, thousands of ships acting as one. Their speed was incredible, faster than any conquered vessel could match. Their formation was tight, precise, almost beautiful in its deadly geometry. The fleet moved to intercept. 200 ships against several thousand, but these were warships, the finest in the Conquered. Each one had shields that could withstand nuclear strikes. Each one carried weapons that could crack planets. They had never known defeat. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Watched in horror as human weapons tore through shields like they did not exist. The shield technology had not changed in 1,000 years. No one had ever found a way through it. The humans had found a way. Ships exploded one after another. Their return fire splashed harmlessly against human armor. Their missiles were shot down before they could reach their targets. Their proud fleet, undefeated for centuries, was being systematically destroyed. When the last dreadnought erupted into a ball of plasma, not a single human ship had been lost. Not one. Commander Al ordered the station to surrender. There was nothing else she could do. Human Marines boarded the station an hour later. Expected them to be monsters, savage, brutal, driven by bloodlust. Instead, they were quiet and professional. They secured the station without firing a single shot. They treated the wounded. They did not harm the prisoners. But their eyes were what frightened most. Every human he saw had the same look, a cold, patient hatred that seemed to go deeper than bone. These were not soldiers fighting for territory or resources. These were the children of genocide, raised on stories of murdered billions, and they had waited 300 years for this moment. Supreme Commander came aboard personally. She was smaller than expected, shorter than most of her soldiers. But when she walked into the room, every human snapped to attention. When she spoke, her voice carried absolute authority. "You are," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," his voice trembled. "Your great-grandfather commanded the fleet that burned Earth." Felt his blood turn cold. He had known this, of course. The family was famous among his ancestor had been a hero, celebrated for leading the cleansing of the human threat. There were statues of him on 3 worlds. I did not." "We know." The Supreme Commander's voice was flat, emotionless. "You were not there. You did not give the order. You are not responsible for your ancestors' crimes." She held out a small data chip. "You will take this to the Conquered Council. You will show them what happened here today. You will tell them that we are coming, and you will deliver a message from me." Took the chip with shaking hands. "What message?" The Supreme Commander leaned closer. For the first time, emotion flickered across her face, not anger, but something worse. Certainty. "Tell them that we do not want their surrender. We do not want their apologies. We do not want their territory or their resources. We want them to understand something." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We want them to understand what it feels like to be helpless, to watch everything they have built be torn apart, to know that nothing they do can stop what is coming. We want them to feel what our ancestors felt 300 years ago." She stepped back. "Tell them the dead have returned, and the dead remember everything." They put in an escape pod and launched him toward conquered space. As he flew away from the station, he looked back at the human fleet. Thousands of black ships hung in the void like a promise of destruction. He had grown up believing humans were extinct, a mistake corrected, a threat eliminated. Now he understood the truth. Humans had not been eliminated. They had been forged. 300 years of exile had burned away everything soft in them. What remained was harder than steel, colder than space, and more patient than death itself. The Conquered had thought it destroyed a species. Instead, it had created an enemy that would never stop, never forgive, and never forget. Flew toward home, carrying a message that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The humans were back. And they were just getting started. The Galactic Conquered had ruled for 10,000 years. They had crushed rebellions. They had absorbed younger species. They had maintained order through strength and fear. 12 ancient empires, united in their belief that they were the masters of the galaxy. None of that prepared them for what came next. The Conquered Council met in emergency session when delivered his message. The recording of the battle it played on every screen. 200 warships destroyed in 11 minutes. 0 human losses. The numbers were impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. High Chancellor Al of the Dominion spoke first. His scales were gray with age, but his voice still carried the authority of centuries. This changes nothing. They caught us by surprise. It will not happen again. We will gather our full fleet and crush them. The other council members agreed. They pledged their bioweapons. The Synod of the Pale offered their holy warriors. The other 9 species promised ships, soldiers, resources. Together they commanded over 20,000 warships. What could a few thousand human ships do against such force? They would soon find out. The collective fell first. There were beings who communicated through chemical signals. 300 years ago, their scientists had engineered the plagues that killed millions of humans fleeing Mars. They were proud of this achievement. They displayed the original virus samples in museums as trophies. Supreme Commander sent a simple message before the attack. We remember the plagues. They unleashed their biological weapons as the human fleet approached. Clouds of engineered viruses filled space around their defensive stations. These weapons had killed humans before. They would kill them again. Except they did not. 3 centuries in the darkness had changed humanity. They had captured bioweapons long ago and spent generations developing immunity. The plagues that should have melted human flesh did nothing. Human Marines walked through clouds of deadly viruses like they were morning mist. The military caste was destroyed in 6 days. Their hive worlds surrendered one by one, but the humans did not burn their planets. They did not slaughter their civilians. They simply removed the military caste, destroyed their weapons factories, and left. They had expected extinction. Instead, they received something worse, survival with the knowledge that they were completely helpless. Their greatest weapons had failed. Their mightiest warriors had fallen. They would live, but they would live knowing that humanity had chosen to let them live. The Synod of the Pale fell next. The Synod were a religious empire. Their priests taught that the universe had a divine order, and the Synod was chosen to maintain it. The destruction of humanity had been holy work, blessed by the gods themselves. For 300 years, their faithful had celebrated Earth's burning as a religious holiday. Their holy fleet met the human Armada in the Crimson Nebula, 10,000 ships against 8,000. The Synod priests blessed their warriors and promised them paradise if they fell in battle against the godless humans. The battle lasted 3 hours. Human weapons were designed not just to destroy, but to terrify. Ships did not simply explode. They were taken apart piece by piece, their crews left to watch as their vessels were systematically dismantled around them. Escape pods were allowed to flee, carrying survivors who would spread stories of what they had seen. When the Synod flagship was finally boarded, the High Priest fell to his knees before the human Marines. He begged for death, a holy death in battle against the enemies of the gods. The humans refused. They took him prisoner, treated his wounds, and sent him home to tell his people what had happened. Your gods did not save you, Supreme Commander told him before he left. Your prayers did not protect you. Remember that. Remember that everything your priests taught you was wrong. One by one, the empires of the conquered broke. The Dominion, proud founders of the conquered, saw their legendary fleet scattered across a dozen systems. There was not touched, but they watched as every military installation in their space was reduced to rubble. The collective, masters of cybernetic warfare, found their networks infiltrated and destroyed by human hackers who had spent generations learning every weakness in their systems. The Alliance, rulers of 100 mining worlds, saw their economy collapse as human raiders cut their supply lines and captured their resource stations. Each empire received the same choice: surrender unconditionally or watch as their military power was taken apart piece by piece. Most chose to fight. All came to regret it. But humanity did not commit genocide. They did not burn worlds. They did not slaughter civilians. Every empire that fell was allowed to survive, stripped of weapons, stripped of power, but alive. This was not mercy, it was strategy. Dead enemies cannot remember, Supreme Commander explained to her officers. We want them to remember. We want their children to remember. We want 1,000 generations to look at what we did and understand what happens when you try to destroy something that refuses to die. The final battle came at the conquered capital. The great station hung in space at the center of conquered territory, a massive structure that had served as the seat of galactic government for. Here, 300 years ago, the 12 species had voted to exterminate humanity. Here, monuments celebrated Earth's burning. The station's defenders fought hard. They knew what was coming. They knew there would be no mercy for those who had given the order to destroy Earth. They threw everything they had at the human fleet, and it was not enough. When the fighting ended, Supreme Commander walked through the burning corridors of the station. Human Marines flanked her, their weapons ready. But there was no one left to fight. The defenders were dead or captured. The station was hers. She found the council chamber at the heart of the station. The great round room where 12 species had decided humanity's fate. The walls were lined with monuments, statues celebrating the cleansing of Earth, displays showing the primitive human civilization that had been mercifully ended. The surviving conquered leaders knelt in the center of the room. High Chancellor Al was among them, his gray scales now pale with fear. The others, representatives of the 12 species, waited for judgment. Walked past them without speaking. She stopped before a large monument that showed a fleet firing on a blue planet. The inscription read, "Here we ended the human threat and secured the galaxy's future." She placed her hand on the monument, then she pushed. The stone cracked. The monument toppled and shattered on the floor. "You expected us to die," she said, finally turning to face the kneeling leaders. "You expected us to scatter into the void and disappear. You thought you understood us." She walked among them, looking at each face. "You did not understand us at all. We do not break. We do not forget. We bend, we adapt, we endure. And when we are ready, we return." High Chancellor Al looked up at her. "What do you want from us? Territory, resources, slaves?" Shook her head. "I want you to live," she said. "I want you to go back to your people and tell them what happened here. I want you to spend the rest of your existence knowing that the species you tried to erase proved stronger than all of you combined." She turned away from them. "The conquered is finished. There will be a new order, and you will remember for the rest of your days that humanity gave you something you never gave us." She paused at the door. "A second chance." The conquereds will broke that day, not through destruction, but through the terrible knowledge that they had created their own doom, and survived only because their victims chose to let them survive. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the real work was just beginning. 50 years had passed since the human Armada returned from the darkness. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The galactic conquered, which had ruled for 10,000 years, was gone. In its place stood the Galactic Assembly, a new government built on different principles. Every species had a voice. Every species had rights. No one would ever again vote to destroy an entire civilization. Humanity held no official power in the Assembly. They did not need to. Every species remembered what had happened to the conquered. Every child learned the story of the humans who had returned from extinction to humble 12 ancient empires. No one wanted to be the next example. Earth had been reborn. The planet that had been burned to glass and ash 350 years ago was now green and blue again. Human engineers had worked for decades to restore the oceans, the forests, the atmosphere. It was not the same Earth that had died. It could never be the same, but it was home again. New cities rose where old ones had stood. New City, built on the foundations of ancient Tokyo, gleamed in the sunlight. Its towers reached toward the sky, monuments to human endurance. Ships from 100 worlds landed in its ports, bringing visitors who came to see the planet that had refused to die. Supreme Commander was an old woman now. Her hair had turned white. Her hands trembled slightly when she walked, but her eyes still held the same fire that had burned in them when she led the Armada home. She stood in Memorial Park in the heart of New City. Before her rose the Wall of Names, a structure of black stone that stretched to the horizon. 8 billion names were carved into its surface. Every person who had died when Earth burned, every soul that the conquered had tried to erase. Her granddaughter stood beside her. Captain was young, strong, full of the same determination that had carried their family through 3 centuries of exile. She commanded a starship now, patrolling the borders of human space. But today, she had come home to walk with her grandmother. They stood in silence for a long moment, looking at the names. "I never knew any of them," finally said. "They died hundreds of years before I was born, but I feel like I know them anyway, everyone." Nodded slowly. "That was the point. We carried them with us through the long dark, we spoke their names, we told their stories, we made sure they were never forgotten." She touched the wall gently, her fingers tracing names worn smooth by countless similar touches. "When I was young," she continued, "I asked my father the same question you are about to ask me. He asked his father asked his father, every generation has asked it." Looked at her grandmother. Was it worth it? The old woman was quiet for a long time. Around them, the park was full of families, children playing, couples walking, groups of friends sharing meals on the grass. Above them, ships crossed the sky, carrying passengers to distant stars. Life continued as it always had, as it always would. "When I was your age," said, "I thought it was about revenge. We would make them pay for what they did. We would hurt them as badly as they hurt us. An eye for an eye, a world for a world." She shook her head. "I was wrong. If we had destroyed them, we would have become them. We would have proved that they were right to fear us. The cycle would have continued forever, one species destroying another forever and ever until the galaxy was empty." She turned to face her granddaughter. "It was never about revenge. It was about making sure it never happened again. We did not return to break empires. We returned to change the rules, to prove that extinction is not an acceptable solution to fear, to show that hope survives, that memory survives." Her voice grew stronger despite her age. "That humanity survives, always." Looked back at the wall. 8 billion names, 8 billion stories, 8 billion lives that had ended in fire and ash, but whose memory had carried their descendants through the darkest night in human history. "The Assembly is debating whether to admit 3 new species," she said. "Young civilizations just reaching for the stars. Some representatives want to study them first, make sure they are not a threat." Smiled sadly. "There will always be fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what might happen, fear of species that are different, that think differently, that might one day be strong enough to challenge us." She put her hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "But that is why we built the Assembly the way we did, so that fear cannot make decisions alone, so that no species can ever again vote to destroy another in secret, so that every civilization, no matter how young or weak, has a voice." She looked up at the sky, where the stars were just beginning to appear in the evening darkness. "We were lucky," she said quietly. "We survived through a combination of chance and in the fact that the conquered did not look hard enough for survivors. Most species would not be so lucky. Most species, if someone decided to destroy them, would be gone forever." "Understood. So we protect the young ones, the weak ones, the ones who cannot protect themselves." "Yes," nodded. "Not because we are better than them, not because we deserve to rule, but because we know what it means to be marked for extinction. We know what it costs to survive, and we will not let it happen to anyone else." A group of alien visitors walked past, their scales catching the fatting light. They stopped at the wall and bowed their heads in respect. One of them, a young female, placed a small flower at the base of the stone. Then they moved on, speaking quietly among themselves. 50 years ago, those same visitors might have been enemies. Their grandparents had served on the ships that burned Earth. Now they came as pilgrims, paying respect to the dead, trying to understand the tragedy their ancestors had caused. The galaxy was changing, slowly, painfully, but it was changing. Grandmother said, "Do you think they really understand? All of them. Do they really understand what their ancestors did?" Watched the visitors disappear into the crowd. "Some do, some are learning, some never will," she sighed. "But their children will, and their children's children. Every generation the understanding grows deeper. Every generation the horror becomes more real to them. That is how healing works, not in a single moment but across centuries." The sun had set completely now. The wall of names was lit by soft lights embedded in the ground, making the carved letters glow against the black stone. 8 billion points of light, like stars brought down to Earth. "I used to come here when I was young," said. "Before the war, before the return, when we were still in exile, still hiding in the darkness. I would look at the names in the memory core and wonder if any of it was worth anything, if we were just fooling ourselves, if we should just accept our fate and fade away quietly. She smiled. Then I would think about my great-great-grandmother, Admiral, who stood in a burning cargo bay with one arm and half her body covered in burns, and told 1,000,000 refugees that we would remember everything, that we would never stop, that someday we would make the galaxy remember too. She turned to her granddaughter. She never saw Earth again, she never saw the return. She died in exile like so many others, but she never stopped believing, and because she believed, we believed, and because we believed, we survived, and because we survived. She gestured at the world around them. The city lights, the ships in the sky, the families in the park, the wall of names standing as eternal witness. Because we survived, 8 billion souls did not die in vain. Their memory lives, their legacy lives, their hope lives. Took her grandmother's hand. "We remember everything," she said softly. Squeezed her hand. "We remember everything." Above them, the stars burned eternal, as they always had, as they always would. And somewhere among those distant lights, 1,000 species looked toward Earth and remembered the lesson that humanity had taught the galaxy. Some things could not be destroyed. Some things could not be forgotten. Some things survived no matter what the universe threw at them. Humanity had been marked extinct. Humanity had returned. And humanity would endure now and forever, as long as the stars still burned. The old woman and her granddaughter stood together before the wall of names, two links in a chain that stretched back centuries and forward into eternity. Behind them, the city hummed with life. Above them, the universe stretched vast and infinite. They had survived the long dark. They had come home, and they would never forget.